Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have a guest that is going to speak about a topic that is much needed in our industry. I have Hallie Sheade with us, and I had the pleasure of meeting her at the Region 6 conference in Dallas. Sat in on a really great presentation that she gave, so I'm hoping to share a little of that with you guys today. As a reminder, you're listening to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast, which is the exclusive podcast of the EAS community. And my goal is just to share things that can help you as instructors, therapists, or if you're a participant or a family listening to learn more about what we do. So, Hallie, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and how you ended up where you are now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on this podcast. So, I grew up taking writing lessons in the Chicago suburbs starting at about age 5. And I joke it was the best decision and the worst decision my parents made because once I got into horses, I had no interest in anything else. But I loved the connections with the horses. And that's kind of the first step of what got me here was I would gravitate towards the horses that other people didn't want to ride or weren't getting along with the herd. And I just felt this pull towards them. And I wanted to work with them, not just riding them, but just sitting in their stall, hanging out with them. And so I felt this interest in understanding what is this human animal bond, because they were having positive responses to me in return that my trainer would talk to my dad about. And so I was like, there's something here, there's something to this. And so at 12, I decided I was going to study animal behavior, and I stuck with that pretty much all the way through my senior semester of college when I was on a track to study animal behavior, was looking into graduate programs to study primates, and I just decided I needed to take a pause and see if that was really what I wanted to do. And I'd been involved with horses almost entirely since I was 5. So I took a year off and I moved to Atlanta, and that was some of where the primate programs that interested me the most were located. And I was just trying to figure things out. I was working in a center that, not a PATH center, but a center that worked with children with autism. And so I was getting more exposure to individuals with autism and other types of cognitive delays or disabilities. And then I learned about this new emerging field of combining horses with counseling or psychotherapy. And so there was a center in my area that was looking into offering that program, but there was no ESMHL certification at the time. And so I started off by becoming a therapeutic riding instructor. So first I became a therapeutic riding instructor. At the time, it was a registered instructor, and I was teaching riding lessons while also helping them start to grow a mental health program that, unfortunately, at that particular center didn't seem to take off with the therapists that they were contracting with at the time. But I was really interested in the therapeutic riding, but wanted to focus more on the mental health route. So I enrolled at Georgia State University to get my master's degree in professional counseling. And I continued teaching therapeutic riding all the way through my master's. And then after I graduated, I wanted to be able to have the option to do research. So I moved to Texas to go to the University of North Texas to study under Dr. Cynthia Chandler, who's an expert in animal assisted therapy in a counseling program. So I went through that. I got my PhD in counseling at UNT. I initially started a private practice doing equine assisted counseling incorporating equines, which we then transitioned to a nonprofit several years later. So currently, I'm the executive director of Steps with Horses, which is an equine assisted mental health services program.
Awesome. Tell me a little about Steps with Horses then. You guys do only mental health? Do you do mounted and unmounted work?
Yes. So our cornerstone service is the professional counseling incorporating equines. So we have licensed mental health professionals. We're also a training program. So we work with graduate level counseling interns, providing counseling and psychotherapy to clients across the lifespan, starting at age 4 all the way up through older adults. But we started seeing a need, and I really started seeing it early in my career before I even had a practice, where I was seeing that my clients, even though they'd met their counseling goals, and the counseling in our program all takes place on the ground, Um, but they didn't want to stop coming to counseling because they didn't want to lose the horse connection.
Right.
So I would refer them to other therapeutic riding centers that offered the riding component with a CTRI or other just riding facilities in the area, non-path. And some of them had good experiences, but some of them really weren't having positive experiences.
Mhm.
And they just felt like they weren't understood. And it wasn't necessarily because it was, a non-path center or because it was a path center. It was just the instructors, some of the instructors that some of the clients were encountering didn't seem to really understand how to relate to somebody who has panic attacks, who may come in one day feeling really down and depressed, or someone with PTSD. And so we decided to launch our own in-house therapeutic horsemanship program, which is a very small piece of our program. It's only open to clients who have come through our counseling program already,
Oh.
part of our step down approach.
Hmm.
But it allows these clients who have either met their counseling goals and don't need counseling anymore, or clients who've been with us for some time and we think it would be a good add in to begin to interact with horses in a way that is less therapy focused and more learning horsemanship, learning riding in a therapeutic environment, in a supportive environment with instructors that truly understand mental health and understand how to relate to them and how to teach to them with some of the unique needs that they may have.
Wow, that's incredible. I hope you feel very proud about that, Hallie. That's really neat. There's, not very many centers out there that take the stance that you do to really focus on that to help that supportive environment. Really, it's an inclusive environment that's focused on, only that. I think sometimes centers get spread really thin with hundreds and millions of programs, right? That it's easy to kind of lose our focus. But it sounds like you guys have your mission really, really at the forefront, and it sounds really great.
Thank you. Yeah, we saw there was a need for the mental health in therapeutic riding, and we never started out with any intention of having a therapeutic riding program.
Mm.
But again, we were just getting feedback from some of our clients that they weren't able to find the kind of experience they were looking for. So we
Yeah.
decided to create it, but also wanting to help other instructors out there who may want to serve clients with mental health needs to be able to do so and have them feel confident and have the clients feel safe and supported.
Yeah, and that's why we're here today. So I'm excited to share this information with our listeners because it's really important. Like you said, I think as we go through, whether you're a path instructor or CHA or whatever instructor ship, certification method that you follow, we serve such a huge variety of clients and participants that it's important to stay educated. The more educated we are, the more empowered we are to deliver really, really great services, which is what we're after. So, today I want to talk a little bit about how we can help our instructors feel that empowerment to help um, teach those who might have some mental health needs while also, staying in their lane and not feeling intimidated by what some of those needs might, come with some of those things that we might see. So, what do you think is the biggest barrier to like you said, when your clients would go to other centers and they just didn't feel supported, what do you think is the biggest barrier there for those instructors?
I think it's a lot of times it's a lack of knowledge and
Mm.
understanding of mental health. When I went through to become PATH certified, at the time I think it was actually still NARA. Um, there was a workshop we went to, and we received some training on people with disabilities and special needs, but I don't recall there was really much about mental health. And so I think the resources just haven't been as accessible to instructors in understanding the needs of this population of individuals. And then from understanding the needs, understanding how to adapt teaching styles and teaching methodologies to work with somebody who starts having a panic attack in the middle
Mm.
of a lesson and to understand what that really is and what's happening inside the person and the kind of support that they're really needing.
Right. I think unless you've experienced something or you've had a loved one that has experienced something like that or that type of a thing, it's hard to know even what to expect or what it looks like or anything like that. Do you think that the mental health like optics of mental health has increased in the last few years. I feel like especially, even when I started as an instructor, which wasn't all that long ago, you're right. We didn't really talk a ton about, hey, some of these participants are going to have mental health concerns. Whereas I feel like now it's much more talked about. Do you feel like that has shifted over the years?
I definitely see it shifting. I see more centers wanting to offer services for individuals with mental health concerns. I think it seems like the stigma is slowly decreasing. It's not gone, but it's slowly decreasing. But I still think there are a lot of misconceptions about mental health, and I think in some cases it can be triggering in some ways for an instructor because if it's something they've personally experienced, it could be triggering, but it could also be really beneficial in that they understand that person on a deeper level, or somebody in their family as well. And so, with mental health in particular, I think it's really important to be very aware of yourself, of your understanding and your beliefs about mental health, your experience with mental health, whether it's personally or someone close to you, because I think it does become very easy to inadvertently cross those lines when you see
Hmm.
someone in pain.
Absolutely. The reason we got into equine assisted services for the majority of us was we wanted to help people, right? And so when we
Mhm.
see people in pain or we see people, that might be having a panic attack or some big worries or anxieties, our first trigger is to, how can I help? And you're
Mhm.
absolutely right. That's when those boundaries kind of start to get blurred. So, can you talk a little bit about maybe giving instructors some guidelines in what that support might look like? I mean, I know it's different for everything that we might experience, but maybe some generalities to how we can stay in our lane but also stay helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first is really doing some self-reflection and having some conversations with yourself and fully understanding what your role is before you even start working with these clients. And then preparing yourself for various situations that could arise. So, a lot of times, what might happen is a rider might come in and they want to start talking to you about everything that's going on, or start talking to their volunteer. So, you also have to train your volunteers
Mhm.
on everything that's going on. And that can get a little dicey because a lot of times people are doing that because they don't have anyone else to talk to, or they don't feel like the people that they can talk to understand. And so they're trying to find that somewhere. And that can get a little tricky because on one hand, you don't want them to feel like you're dismissing them or,
Mhm.
blowing them off. But on the other hand, wanting to maintain the boundaries of both, that they're here for therapeutic horsemanship and riding. And so being able to acknowledge, how they're feeling, but being able to also then redirect them to being there so that you don't get yourself into a situation or your volunteer where you're spending the whole time talking, or you're finding yourself in a really uncomfortable situation that you're not sure how to deal with or how to address.
Right. And I
That's
think
something that we see.
yeah, and oftentimes I think when I've been in situations like that, it has a tendency to escalate sometimes, if we start
Mhm.
talking about all of these things that might be triggering for that participant, and then we end up in a situation that's a little bit um, more big, I guess, than
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
started.
Well, and we're all helpers, right? We all want to help. And so, again, going back to that, seeing that pain in someone else is really hard. And we want to try to fix it. We want to try to make it better. And that's where some people can kind of cross those lines of they start giving advice, or have you tried this? Or maybe you should do this. And that's a really dangerous place to be. Because even as a therapist, we're not supposed to be giving advice because that's not our role. Our role is to provide resources, to provide what we call psychoeducation, which is advice, but it's in the context of established therapeutic concepts and based within the client's treatment plan, just not arbitrary advice. And so we want to be really careful, but also kind of staying within ourselves. So I think because, again, we're helpers, we feel this responsibility, like I need to help, I need to make it better. But remembering our responsibility, and or me when I'm in the role of instructor, isn't necessarily to make everything better, but it's to give them a reprieve, to give them an enjoyable experience during the time that I'm with them. And
Mhm.
that sometimes may not even look like they're actually moving forward in their riding. It may just be giving them an opportunity to be with the horse And whatever my agenda that day of what skill they're going to work on may not actually be what they need. They may
Mm.
want to work on a different skill that they already are feeling confident in because they're just needing that boost.
Right. So let's role play a little. So what would you say? Could you give an example of, as an instructor, what you might say to someone who's doing sort of a dump, I guess, if you will, of
Mhm.
that kind of thing?
Yeah. Assuming there was no risk of harm that was being
Mhm.
disclosed, because that would be something that would have to be addressed in a different way. Um, I would probably just, validate and acknowledge, like, wow, it sounds like you've had a really, really tough week. I'm glad you came to your lesson today. What skills would you like to focus on with your horse?
Mm. Yeah, I like how you put it back kind of on their court. And not only does that give them some control over the situation, which always I think feels kind of good for people that might feel like their life is out of control, but also switches the gears of the brain to something else that they have to think about, which gets you out of that kind of cyclical thought too.
hmm Yeah, and we have had instructors that have had to be a little bit more direct and just
Mm.
be like, I can see that you really want to talk about this. You're really having a hard time, but I do need to remind you that I'm not a therapist. And in my
Mm.
case, I am, but if I'm teaching
Right.
them a lesson, I'm not their therapist. That would be a
Exactly.
dual relationship for me. Um, and so, you know, maybe reminding them if they have a therapist, like this would be something really great for you to talk about with your therapist, but I'm not able to be a therapist, but I want to help you have the best experience here during your lesson today. And so again, kind of redirecting it back to them.
Yeah. Still shows that you care, but also stays within your boundaries.
Right, right, absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about being able to talk with our participants about sort of staying in their lane. What else can we do as instructors to help our participants feel supported?
Yeah, that's a good one, because the other thing that I'll see come up sometimes is an instructor, and instructors are horse people. I mean, sometimes they're therapists too, like me, but they're horse people. And so you're used to teaching riding lessons, you're used to teaching horsemanship. Like you have your system, your procedures of how you do that. And we have our ideas about horses as well. But what will sometimes happen is in mental health is, I think, what the client is experiencing might be missed. And so, for example, if a client is feeling really anxious or uneasy, and in a maybe your instructor growing up, I know I had some that were very tough, might say something like, well, it's fine, you're going to be fine, just cowgirl up and do it. That might feel very demeaning to a rider, very dismissive. And you might be thinking, well, I'm just trying to redirect them and just giving them some encouragement. But if they're not where you are, meaning they're not thinking they can do that, or that's because of what's happening inside of them, that's not their priority at the moment, there's going to be a mismatch. And that can really stretch or break the trust that has been built. And so being able to take a pause when you see it happening and saying, okay, you're really nervous right now. So tell me what's happening. Tell me what you're feeling nervous about. Because as an instructor, you can have those conversations as it
Yeah.
pertains to the riding. Where you don't want to cross is when it goes beyond the riding.
Hmm.
So if you have a client, let's say that would be maybe appropriate, and I say appropriate because some clients may not be appropriate for certain breathing exercises, particularly if there's trauma involved. You always want to be very cautious with clients who've experienced trauma in how you're doing those things. But let's say it's a client that you have some experience in training and breathing exercises, and a client is starting to get overwhelmed, and you want to lead them in a breathing exercise so that they're able to calm their nervous system to be able to continue the riding lesson. I would say that's within the realm. But if you're suggesting that they use this breathing exercise to control their panic attacks outside of the riding lessons, then you've just crossed that line.
Right.
Um,
And I think that that's incredibly an important delineation to make because as instructors, we're educated in the horsemanship and every rider has felt anxious at some point about something that's going on during their ride, whether it's their horse's behavior or canter transition or whatever it is, right? So like being able to manage your nerves in that moment is, you're right, within the realm of your instructorship. Um, So I have a question about how that if that rider comes in anxious before the lesson and being able to tie some of that anxiety back to how it might make our horse feel or how
Mhm.
that relationship might go, and the appropriateness of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach because as a riding instructor, as a equine professional, you're going to be aware already of how our body language, how our emotions interact with how our horses respond to us. And you have to get that skill down to be good at working with horses and good at riding. And so, again, I think if it's in that context of, I can see you're really, really nervous today, maybe they were cut off on their way in and almost had an accident on the drive in. And so, I can tell you're really stressed. So I want you and Red to have a good ride today. So why don't we take some time for you to groom Red, maybe do some deep breathing with Red so that you can calm your system, bring yourself here, and Red won't be worried about how you're feeling today.
Yeah, I love that. I think bringing that back to the horse's feelings creates some buy-in, some motivation too, like some self-awareness kind of check in that way. But also is super kind to our horses too. I know I
Mhm.
had a rider that we were experiencing some anxiety, and we talked about how when we're feeling more anxious like that, sometimes I will leave a horse leader hooked on for that participant because it's possible
Mhm.
that their horse is receiving some different cues or signals, and I wanted everybody to stay safe. And so that was something we had to talk through too, is like sometimes managing more than just your participant, but also like how do volunteers play a role? How do other supports play a role when we have mental health concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing with these riders is going to be checking in with them, letting them be a part of the process. So, there was a rider that was a client that had been at another, riding through another center. And at that other center, they were on a lead line. They'd been riding for several months, but we're not riding independently. And then when we were able to start our riding program, they came to ride with us. And within 2 weeks, they were riding independently. And so there was a mismatch and a lack of communication happening between the instructor and the rider was being treated below their ability and capacity, but didn't want to challenge the instructor or speak
Mm-hmm.
up to them. And so I think checking in with that rider of like, do you feel like you're needing this level of support today? Do you want to try doing this with just a spotter
Mm-hmm.
instead of being on the lead line? Um, and again, I think, the instructor, wasn't trying to hold the rider back, but they would see other aspects of the rider's presentation. And because of their limited understanding about mental health, weren't able to recognize that the rider could do more and was more
Exactly.
capable.
Yeah, I love that you brought that back to an understanding piece because that, ultimately is what it is. It's like your trust level and your comfortability level with whatever, any diagnosis, honestly, whether it's mental health or other, um, and your ability to progress that rider because of that comfortability.
Yeah, another thought then that brings to my mind too is thinking about with the riders, the other thing I'll see sometimes is that instructors will take an approach of like, very much focused on getting compliance from the horse.
Mm.
And there has to be compliance from the horse. And so if the horse isn't listening, we need to, let the horse know that we're in charge, that we're the boss, which in a lot of ways is important. It's a safety aspect. Like, the horse needs to know that we're the more dominant horse, or it can become unsafe. But I
Yeah.
also think there's a balance with that. We're working with individuals who have felt so misunderstood by others, who, have felt at times judged, things like that. And so when they see us taking an approach with the horses that completely dismisses and minimizes the horse's experience or the horse's emotions, then that can feel really uncomfortable to the clients as well. And so I think taking an approach where it's not just, well, he's not turning, so you need to keep, pulling or, bumping him or whatever. It's, well, why isn't he turning? Is it because the
Mm-hmm.
rider is unclear? Is it because there's something spooky over there? Um, we had a rider with one of our instructors several years back, who was the horse was very anxious because he was the only horse in the lesson that day. And so the instructor was focusing on, well, the horse, he just needs to listen. So we need to keep walking him till he's listening to us and doing what he's supposed to do. And all the while the rider was feeling very stressed of like, but he's anxious. He's not just not listening. There's a reason he's not
Mm-hmm.
listening. And we need to understand that and address that. And maybe I don't want to ride him around the whole arena today. Maybe I want to help him calm down and help him feel safe.
Oh, I can't even tell you how much I love what you just said because I actually just had a situation where as a therapist, I got called in to do a kind of a consult on a participant that was struggling a little bit. And we talked exactly about that part was the kind of why is your horse not doing that instead of just telling them what to do? And I think that goes from both standpoints on how we facilitate that as instructors, right? So, like, not only as your rider do you tell your horse what to do, but also as an instructor, we tell our riders what to do. When we could probably flip that script a little bit and say, what do you think? Why do you think your horse is doing that? And then they can ask those questions themselves. And that makes it not only a better, experience for the horse, but also the rider and building those skills and that awareness piece of things, I think is incredible, not only for people with, mental health concerns we need to be sensitive about, but everybody.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It shows us that we can treat the horse the way that we want to be treated, allows the rider to, again, knowing that this isn't the goal for therapeutic horsemanship lesson is to teach social skills or, develop social awareness. But so much of what riders benefit from in therapeutic riding isn't just the riding skills. It's all of the secondary benefits that come along with learning to ride a horse and interact with horses. Even if that's not like, I'm going to teach this skill in this manner, it comes naturally. And we're creating an environment to build those healthy relationships. And, as you were talking, we encourage that as well with our instructors. So, that client, let's say, that did have there was a misfire with the instructor said something, the instructor missed something. We want our instructors to be people that clients feel like there can be that repair with, where if the instructor misses it, the client feels comfortable enough to bring it up maybe in the next lesson, and
Yeah.
they get a positive, supportive response from the instructor who's willing to have that dialogue, or the instructor realizes it and is like, the next lesson, they come in like, I was thinking about our last lesson and I realized that, when you said you were nervous and I said cowgirl up, that may not have felt good to you. And I apologize for that. And so
Yeah.
being able to model what those healthy relationships can look like. And so the instructor becomes a safe person for the client to also build that with.
Absolutely. And we can be be that instructor while staying in our lane and teaching therapeutic horsemanship while also being, a safe person and someone who can take constructive, criticism and change and adjust the way that you teach things. And I think that's just as important of a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely.
This episode is sponsored by Equiforce. Equiforce is a database that allows you to track every facet of your organization, from horse, donor, and volunteer management to scheduling, grant tracking, incident reports, and tracking participant progress, too. This is not a one-size-fits-all setup. Instead, Equiforce personally works with you to learn how your facility functions and takes note of your specific terminology so that they can create a unique system to match the needs of your organization. And of course, Equiforce provides an ongoing training and support so that your database can grow with you. Visit them at www.equiforce.com. That's EQUI-FORCE.com. So when we talk about wanting to educate ourselves more about mental health concerns and how we can help and all of that, what do you think is the best route for instructors to take to educate themselves on some things? Is it a matter of just, looking up a handful of diagnoses and being familiar with them, or how do you recommend they get that experience?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, they're able to shadow somebody or go to a training or, do things like that. But I think even even beyond that, there's a website now, and I think there's probably others like it, called Coursera, where there's a lot of courses you can enroll in that are free and online. So you can enroll in a course to learn about mental health. Um, most, I think in most areas, there are different types of like treatment facilities or behavioral health hospitals. A lot of ours offer free CEUs, like lunch and learns. So get on their mailing lists. And so you're in the know when they're going to be offering a training. And those trainings tend to be geared towards mental health professionals who are needing CEUs to renew their licenses. But I think those are really great opportunities for therapeutic riding instructors and other equine professionals who are not therapists to go just to get a better understanding of mental health and how therapists are talking about mental health and understanding mental health, and also a great opportunity to network with therapists that may have clients that could potentially become riders or participants, or maybe willing to consult with you on particular issues that you might be having of, okay, so, this rider keeps having a panic attack every time they go to mount. Knowing that I can't treat their panic attacks, do you have any suggestions on how to help them over that hump? And so, those are really great opportunities. I think, and then just reading books about mental health in general. And obviously there's a million things out there, but just trying to understand from a human to human perspective. There's a really good book that I encourage all of my new therapists to read. I reread it myself every couple of years as sort of a reset. It's called The Gift of Therapy. And obviously you're not doing therapy in a writing lesson, but it's by Yalom, and he is one of considered the master therapists. And it's just the way he conceptualizes his clients and he relates to his clients. It's a book that's written for anybody. You don't have to be a therapist to read it. And it's several very short, like 2 to 3 page vignettes. And he just talks through the different clients he's worked with and how he's viewing them and how they're affecting him as well. And I think that's a really great model to take with us, even if you're not doing therapy and counseling, just in how you're relating.
Amazing. Yeah. I'll link a couple of those sources that you had in the show notes for folks that want to go check those out. So I'll maybe get with you, Hallie, to make sure I have the right versions of those. But I did want to go back for just a second to talk about the ability to have referral or consult sources, I think is really important, because we're such helpers. If I'm an adaptive riding instructor and I have a participant that, let's say, is having panic attacks every time they're mount and it's impacting our ability to even get on and do, what they came there to do, being able to either, like you said, consult with somebody or, say, here's a referral to maybe a center that has a mental health therapist or someone that might be able to help you, or giving, not just quitting, I guess, if that makes sense. I think the helper in all of us doesn't want to just say, well, sorry, I can't help you. My job is done here. But being able to have
Right.
some other resources, I think, is really important if you're not lucky enough to have those in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some clients that are going to try therapeutic riding or therapeutic horsemanship before they're going to go to a therapist. So the idea of going to a therapist is scary and
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming and intimidating. And so they may come to you first, and you may very well be able to serve them, but there may be some that, because of what they're coming with or how they are when they're there, may be beyond the scope of what can be safe or beneficial for them in a therapeutic riding lesson. And I think that's also different topic than where I'm going with this answer,
Mm-hmm.
but also really important consideration of recognizing when somebody needs more than that, and to benefit from your services, they need to get counseling or psychotherapy first or
Mm-hmm.
concurrently. But going back to what I was saying, if you have relationships with some of the local therapists in the area, you can do a warm handoff where it's not like, oh, why don't you look up a therapist and find a therapist? It's, I know this great therapist who works with PTSD, and I think they could be a great fit for you. Here's their phone number. So
Mm-hmm.
then not only have you helped them in finding somebody, but you're also, giving them, saying that I know this person.
Right. Yeah, and helping them make that, like you said, the warm handoff of, we're not just quitting, but here's a resource and let's, try this again. Or, if you can do it
Mhm.
what am I trying to say?
Concurrently.
Yes, concurrently. I couldn't get my brain to think that way. But yeah, I think that's important. One other thing I wanted to pick your brain on before I let you go is the importance of a good evaluation. So I just did a webinar, our CEO just did a webinar on the importance of evaluation, and that was what our last podcast was as we're speaking right now. And I think it gets tricky when we are in a center where we don't maybe have therapists there to do the evaluations, like what we do at Hetra. Um, but if you're an instructor doing evaluations, how do you ask about, mental health and the history of mental health concerns while staying in your lane, but also staying educated and prepared for what resources you might need going into your lessons?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where it would be good to have a good consulting relationship with a therapist who feels that they can help you in that area. So, one thing would be medications. There are some medications that clients are going to be on for mental health concerns that can affect how they will be in a writing lesson, can affect reaction time, can affect reaction time, can affect attention, movement, all those sorts of things. So I think just first and foremost, being familiar with the different medications or having somebody you can ask. But then from there, maybe developing questions for your center based on the type of mental health concerns you feel comfortable working with. And I think that's a decision for your center first of, are we going to work with trauma? So trauma is the one that I always encourage people to be very intentional and cautious with. And so are we going to serve clients with trauma? How are we going to do that in a way that's safe? Are there certain types of trauma that we feel comfortable with and other types of trauma that we're not as comfortable with? And in that case, I think if you're going to be serving clients with trauma, I think it's really important that if you don't have a mental health professional on staff, that you do have a consulting relationship with one, because it could be very easy to unintentionally do something that could be triggering or cause harm, and you may never know anything
Mhm.
about it. Um,
Is it
but
appropriate
other
to
than that,
ask? Is it appropriate to ask about a history? So let's say I'm an instructor, I'm wearing my instructor hat and I'm doing an evaluation with somebody, and you just ask maybe a general question like, do you have any history of mental health concerns or something like that? Do you find that people will typically, admit a history of trauma, or do you suggest asking more specific questions about any types of specific related trauma?
I think if you can have the writers fill out a questionnaire first, then they're
Mm,
not on the spot and they
yeah.
have time to think about what they want you to know and how they want to share it.
Yeah. I think that's was exactly the point I kind of wanted, or I was hoping that you would kind of say, is just the piece of like meeting someone new and being like, yeah, I had, childhood trauma, and then you're all trying to process this at the same time. I think that's a difficult thing to navigate, but important information to know as instructors or whoever's teaching that participant.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And even with our clients, before we meet them for the intake, and we use the electronic records keeping system, but the way it's set up is they fill out a form that asks, and obviously, we're counseling, so it's a little bit different, but asks about all different aspects of their mental health history.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could keep it more general, like describe your mental health history, and then maybe in parentheses, history of anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
trauma, ADHD, or you could have, specific questions on some of the more common mental health concerns, or grouping like related disorders, related concerns together, and with boxes for them to elaborate.
Yeah, we have a similar setup at Hetra. It's like kind of a checkbox sort of situation where, if you want to divulge, more you can, or you can just, kind of check and move on, and it's kind of non-invasive, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other, tips or tricks for therapists or excuse me, instructors, as far as helping our participants with mental health concerns or kind of a takeaway that you want to give people?
I think it's really about, and with any participant you're going to be working with, but really about knowing yourself, understanding yourself, really thinking about, what do I know about mental health? What do I believe about mental health? so that you kind of can anticipate when how you're going to respond to things, how you want to respond to things, so that you can be that supportive individual for the people who are coming to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any guidance for instructors when they do feel like it's consistently out of their scope, or how to have that tough conversation, kind of like we talked about earlier about,
Mhm.
maybe you need to seek some other services before coming back or that kind of thing. Do you have any advice for that tough conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to be specific. Like, you don't want to just say, well, your anxiety is making it really hard for you to be in the lesson, so I don't think this is going to work. But to tie it to something meaningful, like, I noticed that every time you go to mount the horse, you're having an anxiety attack, and we're ending up spending the majority of the lesson working through that, and you're not really getting to ride. And
Mhm.
so I really want, I know this is a goal for you, and I really want to support you in doing that goal, but we haven't been able to ride the last 3 times that you've been here. So I'm going to recommend that if they already have a therapist, then I would probably have already asked to consult with their therapist.
Mhm.
If they don't, I would say, I'm going to recommend this therapist who treats anxiety in our area, that you work with her a little bit, develop some strategies to manage these anxiety attacks so then we can ride. And so I think if you tie it to either a safety concern, um, they get so anxious, or they're feeling, in some cases, dependent, and this might be more medication related, but if they're very unaware of their surroundings, or they have a very slow reaction time, that could potentially be a safety concern. I would say it depends on, your setup, your volunteers, the horses. You kind of have to evaluate that, but tying it to something concrete, either how they're not being able to do what they want to do, or that, it's creating a safety issue, so that it's not just, okay, I can't help you buy. It's,
Yeah.
here is where we're at. Here's what we need to be able, for you to benefit from this lesson. And here's what to do about it.
Yeah.
Um, Now, on the other side of the coin, sometimes what can happen is you can have the rider who comes in who does want to just talk and talk, and they're disclosing too much. They're telling too many personal details. And in some cases, if there's other riders, it can be really upsetting for those
Mhm.
riders to hear things. And so, I think being able to have a conversation with that rider, and maybe it means you move them to a private lesson if you feel like it's something you can manage better there. Or maybe it's just a really honest conversation of, I know you love coming here. I know you love riding the horses, and I really want you to be able to continue doing it. But when you're here, we need to focus on the riding. And I know you want to tell us what's going on, but I'm not a trained therapist. And so I think for us to be able to continue this, I want to make sure you have that space. So here's a referral, and for a therapist that can help you work through some of these things. So when you're here, I can focus on what I do best, which is helping you learn horsemanship and riding.
Yeah, I love that. Because I think that is a reality for a lot of instructors is that they're teaching classes of 2 or 3 or, however
Mhm.
many riders. And so if we go back to that, this scenario of feeling really anxious and not being able to get on, that impacts the rest of the riders in the class
Mhm.
as well. And so that's I think a part that makes it sometimes really difficult too, or if you have a writer that gets tearful during a lesson or, something like that, where it's like, how
Mhm.
do we manage those things discreetly, to help the whole class be successful, but also help them feel supported?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would think about what you're going to say before you say it. Like, don't just have a spontaneous conversation. I would rehearse it, because the last thing you want to do is make that person feel shame.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so, and maybe you're getting frustrated in the lesson, like, "Ugh, they won't stop talking about this, and I need to teach the other writers." Or I see Susie over here is hearing everything that Billy is saying, and Susie's starting to get really upset. And so that's not the moment you're going to have. I mean, you'll want to redirect Billy, but
Mhm.
that's not the moment you're going to talk to Billy about what needs to happen for him to stay in the program or come back to the program, because
Right.
your emotions may be heightened as well.
Yeah, check yourself before you do the whole spiel and say something you don't mean or, that kind of thing.
Right.
Or you're
Hmm.
received wrong. It's occasionally a thing too.
Hmm. Yeah, and those discussions you'd want to have in private as well, not in front of the other riders and volunteers.
Absolutely. Well, this has been amazing. I am so glad I had you on. I thank you. I know you're a busy woman, so I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity,
Yeah.
and yeah, glad to be here.
Hey, well, I'm going to share some of the resources you gave us, and so everyone can go find those in the show notes. And then before I let you go, I always ask my guests the same question for the season. And this year it is, what is your golden rule? So if someone had to, say, Hallie really lived her life this way, what would it be?
So when I got your email, I was like, okay, I need to think about that because yeah, this is an important question. So I said, treat every person with the respect and compassion you'd want for yourself, and your passion, and let your passion for caring create a lasting impact in the lives of others.
You did put some thought into that. That's great. So much of what we do in equine assisted services is because we're so, so passionate about it.
Hmm.
Whether it's the horses or helping people or the combination and, letting your heart guide you in that way, but guide you in the right path, right? Not down somewhere
Right.
where you be.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you, Hallie. I hope that you won't be a stranger and we'll see you again sometime, but thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. That's all for today. But until the next episode launches, scroll down to the show notes and click on the link to get plugged in with us on Facebook, Instagram, or our exclusive educational club at Patreon. This podcast is presented by Hetra University, the educational arm of Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy in Gretna, Nebraska. Hetra University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to the EAS community. Check out all the Hetra University has to offer at www.hetrauniversity.org.